Hello, this is part 4 where we will be sewing the petticoat from Tulle. This underskirt will provide the necessary volume for the dress. I cut out the base of the skirt from lining fabric since this fabric will be close to the body and should be pleasant. So, I have the front parts of the skirt. I will be sewing the parts using the French seam. What is a French seam? A French seam provides a secure connection of fabrics with a neat wrong side where seam allowances are enclosed. This type of seam is also called a double or lingerie seam. French seams are often used for working with sheer fabrics as they provide neatly enclosed seam allowances. This method is also great for fabrics that tend to fray heavily. So, let's begin sewing the pieces by folding them with the wrong sides together. The seam allowance is 0.5 centimeters, meaning that the seam should be stitched 0.5 centimeters from the edges. I also join the back parts of the skirt with the front part of the skirt on the side seams, and first I join the parts of the skirt with the wrong side inward. At the usual seam we always join the parts with the front side inward, and as it is a French seam, first the parts are sewn on the front side of the fabric. I start matching the pieces from the top edge. I turn the skirt parts to the other side and now you can see that the bottom line of the skirt coincides. So it is important to start joining the parts from the top edge. After stitching the seam 0.5 centimeters from the edge, I turn the skirt piece inside out, align the skirt pieces along the seam, pin them with pins. And now, from the wrong side, I sew the seam 0.7 centimeters from the fabric fold. This way, the seam allowances will be hidden within the seam from the wrong side. I repeat this process for each seam of the skirt. I pressed the seams of the front part of the skirt towards the center front, and I pressed the side seams of the skirt towards the back panel pieces. The center edges of the back skirt panels also need to be finished. To do this, I fold the 0.5 centimeter seam allowance to the wrong side of the skirt and then fold it again by 0.5 centimeters. I sew the seam along the edge of the folded allowance. Sewing the waistband, fold the waistband in half and press it. Align the center of the waistband with the center of the skirt. Note that I am attaching the waistband with the right side facing down and the wrong side facing up. On one side, leave a 1.5 cm seam allowance. And on the other side of the waistband, leave a 3.5 cm seam allowance. Turn the skirt inside out. Direct the seam allowance for attaching the waistband to the skirt inside the waistband. Fold down 1 cm of the seam allowance on top of the waistband and fold the waistband in half. This way, the seam allowances will be inside the waistband. Pin it in place. Before sewing the seam, the ends of the waistband need to be finished. To do this, I turn the skirt right side out, fold the waistband in half with the right side inside, pin it, and sew the seam. On the other end of the waistband, I also fold the waistband in half with the right side inside and sew the seam flush with the central back line. Once the seam is sewn, I trim the seam allowance, leaving 0.5 centimeters, and also trim the corner. Then, I turn the waistband right side out. Now, from the wrong side of the skirt, I tuck the seam allowances inside the waistband, pinning them. I then sew hand stitches before sewing the seam on the sewing machine, since the seam needs to be sewn from the right side of the skirt. The seam should be sewn along the bottom edge of the waistband. Now, I am starting to sew the lower part of the skirt. The base of the lower part of the skirt will also be made of lining fabric. I have measured a 2 cm seam allowance at the top for attaching the upper part of the skirt and marked the attachment lines for the tulle strips. From the top line, I divided the fabric into 3 equal parts. I cut out 6 tulle strips, each 17 cm long, and the width of each strip is the width of the tulle fabric. For me, it's 1.6 meters. It could be 1.5 or 1.4 meters as there are different widths of tulle fabric available. I sew each pair of strips together with a seam allowance of 0.5 centimeters. So, I have 3 strips of tulle, each 3.2 meters long. At the top edge of each strip, I sewed 2 rows of gathering stitches with the maximum stitch width for gathering the strips. On each strip, I need to gather the fabric to match the width of the lining fabric piece. For convenience, I fold the lining fabric piece in half. Then, on each tulle strip, I gather the fabric from one edge to the center seam on the tulle strip. As this is the midpoint of the strip, I distribute the gathers evenly. Next, on the other side of the strip, I also gather the fabric from the edge to the center seam on the tulle strip, as this is exactly half of the strip. I start sewing the tulle strips from the bottom line on the lining fabric skirt. I secure the tulle strip with pins beforehand. From each edge of the lining fabric skirt, I measure 2 centimeters. And I sew the tulle strip up to this mark. This will be the central seam at the back that we will sew using the French seam. Now I attach the second ruffle to the next line, moving from the bottom to the top. Then, I sew the third tulle strip to the top line of the skirt. Next, I join the upper part of the skirt with the lower part. To do this, I flip the upper part of the skirt to the wrong side and connect it with the lower part at the center. Also, please note that I sew the upper part of the skirt up to the marks on the edges of the lower part of the skirt. I flip the skirt to the wrong side to close the seam. I will be closing the seam with hand stitches, folding the seam allowance inward and securing it with hand stitches. It's not necessary to do this with hand stitches, you can also finish the edges with an overlock stitch. However, I enjoy hand sewing, so I will do it this way. I fold the skirt in half with the wrong side inside, aligning the seam allowances at the center back of the lower part of the skirt. Since this is a French seam, I sew the seam on the right side of the skirt first. I fold the edges of the tulle strips to the sides and pin them in place so they don't get in the way while sewing. So, I've sewn the seam on the right side of the skirt. Now, I turn the skirt inside out, align the fabric along the center seam, pin it in place, and sew the seam. This way, the seam allowances are hidden inside, and only the seam is visible from the right side of the skirt. I fold the seam allowance twice by 0.5 centimeters from the wrong side of the lower edge of the skirt. Then, I sew the seam. Additionally, at the top, I've attached a clothes hook. And that's all. The process of sewing a dress with a drop waist and puff skirt is complete. I invite you to my store on Etsy where you will find this pattern. Bye.